Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm thrilled to be talking about the Netflix series Nobody Wants This with creator, writer, and co-showrunner Erin Foster. And in talking a little bit and going back to the genesis of what made you create this show, I've heard you talk about going through Jewish conversion classes and just kind of conversationally talking to your manager and producing partner about some of the experiences and different stories that people were sharing, and that it was them that pointed out, actually, maybe there's a show in this. And once you kind of had that realization of being able to pull it together and make it something episodic from your own experiences, I was interested in how you kind of found that starting point, because it is so much centered around these two characters, but it's also the tangent of all the characters around them in this world as well.
Yeah, I mean the at the center of it, it's really a relationship story, but when you're selling a TV show, you have to come up with what the angle is that would separate it from another story and like why now? Why are we meeting them today? What story are we telling? And it's always interesting when something's happening in your real life. I mean, from myself at least, I don't typically see the things happening in my life as something that would make a good TV show. It's usually someone smart around me who can sort of say like the things you keep bringing up are interesting to me. And when I was learning about Judaism, it was like I was very impassioned when I would talk about it to people because I was excited as a 36-year-old woman to be like discovering this new thing that I had fallen in love with. And there were a lot of interesting things when I was in my relationship where it just felt like being in a healthy relationship brought up all these new things that had never come up in other relationships before. And that was interesting to me.
I was also interested in the journey of the tone of the show, because you've described how when you were writing it, you kind of felt like it was in the vein of something like Fleabag, and then the conversations with Netflix, they were seeing it as more of a rom-com. And was it something where once they had that perception of it that you changed the tone at all, or is the tone that we saw on screen kind of always where you intended it to be?
You know, I They didn't change the tone. It was more that I think in my mind, I was imagining the show to be a bit edgier in my mind, like what it was going to feel like. And I think that Netflix has a great ability to see like commercial success and see what will make the show feel big. And at the end of the day, a show feeling commercial and feeling big doesn't mean it can't have integrity and edge and bite and sharp humor and good dialogue. It really just means that it's going to be seen by so many more people and be absorbed and they just have a really good instinct for that, obviously. So so it was kind of more like I had a different idea in my mind of what kind of writer I was. Like I never thought of myself as a rom-com writer. It was just not what I pictured because I always sort of wrote these more like cynical, sarcastic stories about dating and relationships and so I kind of really found my lane and my voice in writing this show. And then when it came out, like when I wrote the pilot, I wasn't writing a rom-com pilot. I was writing a relationship show that I was interested in, and that I would want to watch. And then when it came out and it was seen as a rom-com and it was like that's the category it's in and that's the lane and people liked it so much, that's when I realized I like this lane. I like the rom-com lane and I'm happy to be here. And that was exciting to me because I hadn't really viewed my writing style to have a lane before.
No, that's so interesting. And also in terms of the specific style and the way that the comedy's written, it's very conversational and dialogue driven, and is written in a way that feels very naturalistic to the characters. And the way that they're kind of connecting to each other. It's also part of the chemistry between Noah and Joanne. How did you find the comedic sensibility and style in that way for the show?
I've always written that way, and it's kind of been something I've been a little insecure about in the sense that I'm not a traditional comedy writer. I'm not a traditional joke writer. And I've been in plenty of writers' rooms with, strong comedic writers and they can just like churn out like joke, 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 joke. And sometimes when that's what the script calls for, I think, I wouldn't be able to help someone like, write their roast or something for Comedy Central, and maybe that means I'm not a real comedy writer. Um, and so it is something that ended up being really positive in this show. It is a writing style that I always really like. I like watching films and TV shows that feel natural and feel grounded because that's when I think you get really lost in what you're watching and you feel connected to it. When something feels silly, it feels broad, it feels like heavy-handed in the jokes, you kind of remember you're watching a TV show. And anything that I can ever do to seamlessly make you feel like it could be a moment out of your life or a friend's life where you get lost in the message or the philosophy on love, and then you have a conversation about it afterwards. That's my favorite thing to do as a viewer. And so it's my favorite thing to create as a writer.
Yeah, and I also feel like with that idea of it feeling very connected and lived in that way that you were just describing, it also kind of fits in with the pacing of the show. And you'd initially had the thought of maybe having them engaged or married by the end of season one, but once you realized that by going slow, you could kind of really breathe life into it in a different way, how did that allow you to make the story feel much more connected and much more lived in?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you first are told, okay, we're gonna buy 10 episodes of this show, where do we go from there? It's like, okay, well then I guess they should be you pick these sort of like high touch points, like big moments. Okay, I guess they're engaged by the end of season one. But then Netflix was really great because they said, like, slow it down. We're not in any rush here. And we like how slow it moves in the pilot. I like that they don't kiss in the pilot, so you aren't getting too far ahead of yourselves. And then it just started to naturally unfold when we were writing the season. Oh, a first date is a fun thing to watch. A first kiss is a fun thing to watch. Like, let's take this almost in real time. And yeah, it's not something I set out to do, but then once we were doing it, I realized that um, when you aren't like rushing to get to a certain place, you can slow down and actually enjoy the moments a little bit more. And then for the viewer, it feels even more anticipatory because you're like, oh, it just happened. Like, you have the first kiss and then you're immediately looking at your phone wondering why you haven't heard from that person. And you're watching like the next 3 hours of spiraling afterwards. And we've all done that.
And even in looking at when the two characters first meet in the first episode, like what was the precipice of what felt important in that meet cute? Because it almost feels like there has to be enough chemistry to intrigue them. And even just the way that we see Noah when everybody's sitting around talking, like he's smoking, he's drinking, and there's enough in it to circumvent the idea of what Joanne would have had of him otherwise and to really intrigue her. And so, how did you figure out what was important in that scene and that initial meet?
I knew really clearly some things that were very important to me because I think that there have been plenty of shows about a a Noah type and a Joanne type, and they're usually like really, really opposite. She comes in this fur coat, he's this conservative rabbi. How would these two people really make it work? Why would they actually be interested in each other in real life? And so I really wanted to give them both reasons for being interested in each other, not like a TV show version of these two people who make no sense in the real world, but two people who actually would have a crush on each other if they met. So because she comes in with this like larger than life, like relax, it's fake, I'm wearing this fake thing, she kisses her, girlfriend who is hosting. For Noah watching this, he'd be like freaked out, right? This girl's a lot. She's wild. But then she comes in, she wants to connect like really like directly with him and she pushes him to like open up and say something honest about himself and she says something honest about herself. And that really intrigues him. But it was really important to me that she says, oh, can I have a wine opener, or like a bottle opener? And he, instead of handing it to her, is like, I'm opening your bottle of wine for you. Because a guy like Noah, who's warm and soft and sensitive, he has to be a man with a woman like Joanne. He has to like take control. I know that my husband would never hand a beautiful single girl when he was dating a bottle opener if he could have just opened the bottle for her. Like I know that watching Simon, he would never like do that. So those things stuck out to me because Simon has this sort of like old world chivalry that he does that makes kind of a strong, tough modern woman feminine and sweet and like you like to feel taken care of. And so it was important that he had these moments of like smoking a joint, opening up a bottle of wine, making her laugh. You know, that for me is like the biggest thing is how they both have a really good sense of humor. That is such a binder in a relationship. You know, someone who makes you laugh, like that will keep you attracted to that person for 50 years. And so all those moments were very strategic in making the dynamic balanced so that you could actually see these people really wanting to go on a date with each other.
Yeah, what you were describing about with the shared sense of humor and the ability to make each other laugh, and she kind of comes across very charismatic and like someone that makes everybody around her laugh all the time. But I love that moment where he walks her to the car and he kind of jokingly goes like, "Oh, I read inside your mind while we were all sitting at the table. It was very inappropriate." And was it
Mhm.
also important to you to set up like not only can they make each other laugh, but also there's kind of a shared sensibility of the type of humor that they both find funny, even though you might not expect it at first.
Yes, because if she has a sarcastic, kind of edgy sense of humor and he's kind of like, oh, no, don't say that. You know, come on, that's crazy. Or, you can't say things like that. I don't see you making it work with that person. Like, he has to have a shared sense of humor. He has to be in on the joke, or else he isn't in on the joke. You can't be with that person. You have to be with the person who like gets it, you know? So it was important to me that he didn't feel like small town, you know?
Yeah.
And it was important, very important that he have this sort of sexy, charming game, you know, like pretending like his car is where her car is, because he knows that a woman like Joanne is not going to just like let a guy walk her to her car. So it's like, okay, I have to kind of pretend my car's where hers is so I can walk her to her car, make sure she's safe, and then subtly let her know, like, nah, I got a spot back there. Like, I didn't have to walk this far with you. Like, that's hot. That's what women want is to see.
No, I love all the details that even just go into that small little moment. And there's so much growth in terms of like Joanne being very self-reflective and kind of having to confront a lot of things within herself throughout the story. But, you know, he also grows just as much in different ways. And even just early on, where he starts to kind of respond to her being someone who's much more open with thoughts and feelings and ideas and on the surface in that way, and realizes like this actually makes me a better rabbi. It makes me connect to the people I'm trying to help better. How did you find the ways in which you wanted him to grow from her?
Well, you know, in that sense, I pulled a lot from my real relationship because my husband has immigrant parents and they fled Soviet Union because they were Jews and in a time where that wasn't a good life. And because of that, they are really private people. And that can be taken to an extreme where you don't share things that help you connect with someone and you hide things that are could be exposing to you, but also could help someone understand you. And so that's something that my husband and I really, struggled with in the first few years of our relationship was like what to share and what not to share. And I think that he has learned how powerful it is to be open because if you have a secret, then someone always has something that they could use against you. You know, if they find out the truth about something, they can always have a power over you. If you're open and you share things and you don't hide anything, no one has any power over you because they can't use something against you. There's something about it that is actually very powerful and very like um, it's very like it makes you feel at peace because you're not hiding from anything. And so that's something that I don't know, like my husband really grew with and realized how strong he felt when he would just tell the truth about something, be open.
I also feel like everything that you're describing there kind of folds into the fact that, yes, at the center of this show and this relationship, one of the big obstacles is religion, but it's also really looking at and exploring all of the different facets of what you have to figure out about each other and, decisions you have to make. And it's the idea of, what's your relationship with your family like? How close are you to your sister? Do your friends like me? And so was it just as important to really look at all of those sorts of facets and conversations between the two of them as much as it was the religion at the center?
Absolutely. I mean, most people are not going to relate to a story where one person is Jewish and a rabbi and one person is not, right? That's like a very specific challenge to have. And yet so many people connected with this story because I don't think it's really about Jewish and non-Jewish or rabbi and shiksa. It's really about meeting someone in your 30s and coming from really different worlds, different families, different friend groups, different work lives, and figuring out if you have enough in common to make it work and figuring out if you're too stubborn at that point. I mean, at some point in life, you get very set in your ways. So you could meet a doctor tomorrow and be like, okay, am I ready to be a doctor's girlfriend or a doctor's wife? Am I ready to be a part of that world? Am I ready to spend my time and socialize with people who use words that I've never heard of or are doing something that feels more important than what I'm doing? Like, it's a relationship is a lifestyle. So it's really just two people figuring out if they can make this work.
And it's also something where any sort of obstacles or kind of little bumps in the road to figure out can be between those two people, but there's also so many external aspects, going back again to do your family and friends like me is one. And, we kind of see that play out in the show and what that looks like. And as you were kind of mapping out the narrative and the push and pull between the two of them, how did you figure out where do we feel like there's going to be some sort of road bump for them to confront where it's going to be about the two of them, and where do we feel like actually they're good, but maybe the external forces around them are going to come into play here?
I don't know if there was really a formula to it. It was mostly like, to me, religious stuff should be sprinkled throughout and not sort of the main sources of conflict. Um, and I think we just tried to find a balance so that it wasn't one thing over and over again. And I think the family thing was sort of always going to be a challenge. Something that, when there's been negative feedback about the Esther character being, a stereotype of a Jewish woman being angry or something, it's really forgotten that she's Rebecca's best friend. That's why she's so resistant to Joanne, not because she's a Jewish woman, because she's best friends with his ex-girlfriend who's heartbroken. And so I always thought that it was interesting. I have a sister-in-law, my husband has a brother and his wife, and I always felt like she held the keys to my future, because she was my husband's best girlfriend. They were really close. They were like a little, trio. So I come into the mix, and if she's not vibing with me, I'm screwed. So I always felt like the sister-in-law was this like very important piece of the puzzle, and that I used to think like, imagine if my sister-in-law was best friends with Simon's ex-girlfriend. That would be very complicated. And so that was a dynamic I always wanted to have in there, just to create another obstacle for this couple that wasn't connected to Judaism and also you could really see happening in the world.
Yeah, and in talking about the siblings in the show with Morgan and Sasha, they kind of form their own friendship, and there's definitely a definitive line of nobody's having an affair, but at the same time, there are boundaries and lines that are crossed and things that they're not telling their own family members at the same time. How did you find how far you wanted to push it and where you felt like the lines were allowed to cross, but where you felt the limits were and how much you wanted to bring them closer together?
We kind of planned on them going further with it and taking it too far and getting physical, and it had been written at one point. And then when we were in the process of shooting and watching the actors and the characters, it just started feeling less and less right. It just was like, I don't think we want to see these two people really crossing that line. I think that it should be much more internal, and it should be much more that Morgan is a self-destructive person and Joanne has always been the same way. And all of a sudden, Joanne completely just like elevates herself out of that and is trying to be in a healthy, stable relationship. And Morgan feels really abandoned. And so her instinct is to like destruct somehow. And so it's an attempt to mess with what Joanne has in her life. It's also an attempt to just be messy. And I think a guy like Sasha, while she finds him to be like ridiculous and silly, and she's not necessarily like attracted to him, the idea that he's like a wife guy is so interesting to her. And the fact that he and Noah just are like decent people. I think there's something about it where she's like, well, maybe I want that too. And so, yeah, I think just like emotional boundaries get crossed.
And with what you were describing there about the self-destructiveness that's in Joanne as a character, it feels like that really changes in a lot of different ways over the course of the season through this relationship. And the episode where she starts to get the ick feels like a big turning point because he's like, I see exactly what you're doing and I'm not going to engage with it. It's also not going to scare me away. Go deal with your stuff and I'll be over here whenever you're ready to talk like adults about it. And how did you want an episode like that to kind of really be a turning point in the relationship, but also how Joanne deals with things within herself?
That one was really based on my real life because my husband and I had been hanging out for, I don't know, a month or two. And I got freaked out. I just got freaked out at something really silly, the way he said something. I don't, it was like something so small. And I just decided, okay, I don't like him anymore. This is so upsetting because I thought he was the love of my life. I was never been more loved, never been more happy. But now that this little tiny thing happened, I can never see him again. And I was so scared of that feeling because when you get that feeling, it's really hard to reverse it. Once you get that feeling of like, oh God, I don't like him anymore, it's it's like you have no control over it. It's just there and you can't unsee the thing. And I've had that happen to me 100 times with nice guys. Typically, it was when someone was too into me, too emotionally available, not playing games, and it would freak me out. So I would find something small. And when I did that with Simon, he literally was like, tomorrow, meet me at the gym, wherever we were going, get in my car, I want to talk to you. And I got in the car and it was like, I was like, oh God, what's he gonna do? He's gonna freak out. He's gonna say like, why aren't you calling me back? Or, he's gonna spiral because that's what you do. And instead he was like, I can tell that you have got some shit going on. And so I'm just gonna let you figure that out and let you know that like I'm not going anywhere and I'll be here and I'll, see you when you're done freaking out. And I was so taken aback by that approach. And I immediately felt all those scared, negative feelings, they just went away. Because the fear really was, can I have highs and lows and, crazy moments without scaring this person off? Can he handle it? Like, I needed to know I can handle you. I can handle your freakouts. I can handle your, you know, self-sabotage. I am like a stable force here. And I needed someone who had that confidence. So it was always important to me to have that moment for them.
And in writing the sister relationship between Joanne and Morgan, there's that point where Joanne describes it as, yeah, like she's my sister, she's my best friend, but she's also my biggest enemy. And, you kind of really get to play with the extremities of where things go when they're mad at each other. But at the end of the day, they still love each other and they're always going to come back to each other. And there's such a playfulness as well. And especially working on the show with your sister, how did you find what you wanted to include and what felt really important to portray in that relationship on screen?
It's a like a more extreme version of my sisters and I because my sisters always loved Simon and they always supported me in my relationships. We've never been competitive with each other. Those things were never factors, but I imagined how hard it would be if they didn't like Simon right away or if they felt threatened by that relationship because that sister dynamic is so close, it's so intimate, and it's so honest, it's so brutal. And so I've always loved to write sisters. I think it's just a unique dynamic. It's like that's the only person who can say the things that a sister can say. Um, if a friend said half the shit a sister said, you would never talk to them again. So, um, yeah, I mean, I definitely thrive writing sisters and a lot of it was just putting these two women in this like self-protective mode together and then one of them tries to grow out of it and makes the other one feel really left behind and it makes her act a little destructive.
And in the writers' room in season one and going through the process of developing this show, there's certain moments where you have to kind of advocate for a certain scene or a moment or something between characters. And, it's really this gut instinct of, I feel like it's going to work. Has that changed at all in the work that you've been doing on season two with having gotten to watch season one and just really seeing what our audience is responding to and what are they really connecting to as well? Because now you can bring that alongside your gut instinct.
Yeah, no, it helps a lot. I mean, it's like you get all this data. I mean, I watched all the TikToks that people were making, like I didn't look at the show as being um like commentary on a healthy relationship. I knew I was doing that, but I didn't really categorize it that way. So watching women feel like, oh, I really feel seen. This is the kind of love that I really want to have in my life. This is healthy, and it's like romanticizing healthy love. That to me was cool. I was like, okay, I like that angle. I see, and I like that people are grabbing onto that. So then it's like, obviously, I want to lean into that for season two. Obviously, I want to find more moments that are real relationship moments where you're sort of at a crossroads. How do you handle it? And show these people pushing through those moments, or how do they figure out those moments together? I definitely paid attention to the feedback from season one, and leaned into things or leaned away from things. And all the people in the writers' room, I've had a lot of support from people really making it clear, like if this is something that you really want, like season one, the ick episode and the basketball episode kept getting changed. It just kept, I don't know, being talked, it just in the writers' room, it was getting talked about in a way that was getting phased out and other stories were coming in. And then two of the writers, Jane Becker and Lindsay Golder, came to my office and they were like, we feel like there are two episodes that are really important to you to have, which is Basketball Wives and The Ick. And we don't like the idea that they keep getting pushed out. If it's important to you, then they should be in the show. And it really helped remind me this is my show. And if that's important to me, I should fight for it because this is my one chance. And so I really appreciated having that support from the writers that if it's important to me, then we get it in.
That's really wonderful. And in looking back at kind of where you found the endpoint of season one, there's some beats to that that feel so important in terms of Joanne doesn't make him choose. It's not, oh, it's this or it's me. It's the fact that she says, I would never make you choose between the two, but I also have to have a boundary for myself in what I've
Yeah.
realized and what I've learned. And then he's actually the one that turns it into a choice for himself because he realizes, actually, this does feel more important to me in this moment. And I can only imagine how many conversations there were about that ending and finding the right point and finding the
Oh, yeah.
right dynamic between the two of them. And I was interested in what was some of the internal kind of push and pull or conversations that went into finding that final moment.
Well, we got really behind schedule season one, as happens, all the time. And so we were kind of writing the finale as we were shooting it, which is I don't recommend to anybody. And figuring out the best place to leave them off. I mean, I knew that we could never have her make him choose between, his faith and his career and the woman he loves. I really liked the idea that Joanne grows up by the end of the season and really, puts herself out there and admits that this doesn't feel right to her. Um, I wanted to see her put him first for the first time ever in her life, feel like she's being really selfless. And I wanted Noah to be able to make the gesture without that pressure from her because I just thought that it was very important for their dynamics. And so, the conversations in the writers' room really were about how do we create that big romantic moment at the end? How do you not see it coming? How do we create a timeline that makes sense where he could really show up at the end? But we've really convinced the audience that he's not coming. You're looking at your screen, you're going like, I don't get it. There's 43 seconds left and he's nowhere to be found. He's still inside, And so it was really like playing and with the fine-tuned timeline and the reality of could he have gotten to the parking lot in time? Um, and her, there's a moment in Good Will Hunting, which is one of my favorite movies, where he's broken it off with her and she's convinced that he's gonna like change his mind. And she leaves and she's at the airport. And I don't know if you remember this. Do you remember this scene?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
Okay,
great.
so she's like walking through the airport and she's walking really slowly because she keeps thinking he's gonna show up and he's gonna change his mind and like grab me and have this romantic moment. And she's like giving the ticket and she's sort of looking over her shoulder, like, one last chance to grab me. And he doesn't. And I always loved that scene because it's so real for how we think as women. Like he's got to change his mind. And so I wanted Joanne to feel that way. Like she's walking slowly and she gets on the bus and someone comes on the bus and she's like, oh my God, it's him. And then it's like a kid. And right when she's finally given up, like, wow, I cannot believe he's not fucking coming. And then that's when he's there.
Yeah. I love that. And it's such a perfect way to end the season and also to kind of set everything up for season two. And, hope everything's going fantastically with production on season two. Very excited to see it. And thank you so
Yeah,
much for
we're
talking all
completely
about it.
done. So it all went great.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Erin.
Okay, thank you so much. Nice to meet you.